This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 85. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. But before we get started, let's talk about our great sponsors. 1791 Gunleather is the presenting sponsor of the Guns Magazine podcast, and they'd like you to know their appreciation for the Second Amendment fuels their passion for gun leather and its representation of the original patriots of this great nation. 100% certified American Steerhide joins 4 generations of professional leather artisans, creating the perfect firearms holsters. Carry your firearm with pride, knowing that each 1791 Gunleather holster is handcrafted to be the best holster for your firearm. See their full product lineup at 1791gunleather.com. The supporting sponsor of the Guns Magazine podcast is Hodgdon Powder. Available in granular powder and pellets, Hodgdon's family of 777 powders gives muzzleloading enthusiasts a quick cleaning, low-odor black powder substitute for rifle and pistol applications. To learn more, visit Hodgdon.com. Today is one of our regular check-ins with Roy Huntington. Roy's the proverbial guy who's forgotten more stuff about firearms than most people will ever know, and our discussion should be a fun one today as we talk about the DIY stuff you can do to make a nasty old gun stock or grips look better than new. Now here's my chat with Roy Huntington on DIY stock refinishing. Well, good afternoon, Roy. How are you on this warmish afternoon?
No, warmish. It's, I think, 182 degrees outside. We're doing all right, though.
Well, I know it's warm there, it's warm here, but our friends out at Gunsight, they had 111 the other day on the range. That's just awful.
I know, and let's not even go to it's a dry heat thing. It's still 111.
Yeah, it's dry heat, like an oven. So,
yeah. Well,
thanks for taking the time to talk to us, Roy. We're going to talk about stocks and stock refinishing and the how to do it right, and I can tell you how to do it wrong. And it was funny, I was thinking about this as we were getting ready to talk, and I remember the very first gun stock I ever built. It was for my Red Ryder BB gun, about probably age 11, and I found a piece of 2x4 and my dad's handsaw, and I made me a new stock, and it looked like a stock that was made by a 12-year-old with a handsaw. It was an ugly thing, but it was mine. So hopefully we can guide folks along, do maybe a little bit better job than that.
At least you were doing it, though.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people make fun of that kind of stuff, but at least, you were in the arena, as it were, so good for you.
Well, and I think that raises the point that, we've all probably done it at some point. Some of us have done it a lot. And that's one of those things that even with the best intentions, sometimes the final product does not match up with the imagination as you leapt into that. So I'm sure you've had a few that didn't turn out quite like you hoped they would.
Oh, no, all of mine come out perfectly from the very first one I ever did.
Of course. Yeah. Well, talking about finishing, I mean, there's been a lot of different finishes used over the years. The lovely hand-rubbed linseed oil, was for a lot of years. And then as guns got less expensive, they even used things like shellac and things like that. So let's assume that somebody's got grandpa's old shotgun and it's not super expensive or unique, and they want to clean it up and use it as a shooter. It's got this ugly old stock that's probably oil soaked and just doesn't look right. How would you tackle that job if they came to you?
One of the things that I think people run into trouble with is that they overthink it, and then they get intimidated by it all because they see a picture of a original Weatherby, or they see that $10,000 hand rub finish, on a custom bolt action rifle, and it scares them to death.
Yeah.
And I think this is a situation where a little bit of knowledge really goes a long way. If you had grandpa's bolt action 16 gauge shotgun, chances are pretty good it's going to have a walnut stock, an older gun. They were often walnut, or maybe birch, or some other hardwood. And the thing to do is first off, is just evaluate it, look at it. Is it in fairly decent shape? Good. If it's all dinged up and beat up and everything, we'll save that for another day. But let's say you have a reasonably clean, straight stock. It's just got, just normal wear and tear. It's, maybe little nicks and chips and that kind of stuff. And you just want to make it look nice again. And so that's what we'll talk about. Does that sound about right to you? That sort of general everyman stock. Yeah. First thing I would do is round up a similar piece of wood if you can. And that might be a beater gun that you have, a really bad one, or it might be go to the home, store and buy a little piece of walnut shelving material or a hardwood of some kind and something like that. Because what you want to do is practice on that first. And until you kind of get a feel of what you're doing. And what I'm going to do is give you what I would call sort of the everyman's baseline. This is going to make your stock look nice just about no matter what process. And you can go on YouTube and you can see really complicated things. And if you look at the woodworking guys, they're all doing French polishes, and it can be very complicated. And I'm not saying what I'm about to explain is going to get you that $10,000 rifle hand rub finish. But I will tell you this, it's going to look pretty darn good. And when you hand it to people, they're going to look at it and look at you and say, "You did this?" Which is always satisfying.
Yeah.
So shall we leap right into it then?
Dive right in, even though I'm still hung up on this whole practice beforehand.
I know.
What a bizarre concept.
Imagine that?
Yeah. We're guys. We don't do stuff like that.
I do it in my shop all the time. It's like if I'm going to build some new something, I always round up some MDF or some cheap wood or something like that. And I do some sample cuts, and I do, I look at what my finish is going to be, and I do some finish selections. And gosh, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, why not practice a little bit before you do it? And so in this situation, I think the first thing people do is that they sand everything to death. And so put your sandpaper down for a minute. And depending, because you're going to round over all the edges, and you're going to, sand over the checkering if it's got that and everything. So put your sandpaper down and let's look at the finish. If it's a spray-on clear coat, which they did, in the 50s and 60s and through the 70s, you're definitely going to need to have some sort of finish remover. So, the goopy stuff that you paint on and then it bubbles up and then you scrape it off. You want to do that to get any kind of heavy spray-on finish off. And then that way you'll get down to the real wood and just follow the directions. It's really easy to do. If there isn't a real thick, shiny finish that's been chipping off or something like that, then chances are good it's just a polyurethane wipe-on finish or it's an oil finish. And so now you're good to go. So let's say now you've got the old clear coat off, or you're starting with this normal oil finish stock. What I would do is start with 220 grit sandpaper, and all you're looking to do here is sand with the grain whenever you can, and you just want to smooth things out a little bit, get rid of some of the bumps and dings. But remember, don't stand too long in one little tiny spot because it'll dish out.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to tell you a secret here that a lot of people don't know. If you've got dings and bumps and creases and stuff like that, get your iron, don't tell your wife that you're using her iron, but you get your iron, and then you want an old washcloth or something. You want to wet the washcloth, lay it on the dent or the crease or the whatever on the stock. Hold the tip of the iron on there, and you'll hear it sizzle and bubble and everything. And what you're doing is you're making steam. So you're steaming the wood. What that does, you'll be amazed, is it actually raises the dent. And so, just leap right into that. So let's say now you've sanded it a little bit, you've raised the dents, things are looking pretty good. Now I would go ahead and sand to the next grit. Now remember, this is really important. People jump from 220 grit to 400 grit, but you can't do that. You really need to take it step by step. And so from 220, you might want to do either if there's a 280, get a 280, but probably 320. Then go over the whole gun and sand at 320 again, and then go ahead and sand with 400. And what you're going to do now is you're going to have this really smooth, beautiful piece of wood. And you're thinking, this is really fancy. Except what you're going to do now is get that wet, damp cloth and wipe over the whole stock. And you're going to think, oh, no, what have I done? Because now it's going to feel all rough again.
Yeah.
What they've done is that they've raised the grain. Mm-hmm. And so you get these little whiskers, sticking up. You've probably seen that in some of the work you've done. Yeah. Then go back to your 400 now and sand back over it again. And then that's going to get rid of them. And now things are really going to be nice. And at that point, I would probably do the wet cloth and raise the grain again one more time. So now you're ready to actually put the finish. Now, this is the part where everybody gets terrified. They don't know what to do. Because you and I both know, you go to Home Depot, what is an entire aisle of finishes?
Yep.
Every kind you can think of, and they're all scary, and you have no idea what on earth is Danish oil, what is polyurethane, there's just so many things in. Where do you start?
Well, to interrupt here, we just moved into our new house with walnut trim. I wish you had been there at the Home Depot with me in that aisle. Well, I had 17 different things stacked there, and I asked the guy there, and he didn't really have anything. They're all really good, and I read the back of them, and, it was a 72-step process involving, a troop of mimes and a voodoo doctor, and it was awful.
And that's the problem. And what the bigger problem is? Most of them don't work very well. But we're victims of advertising. It's really true, because I've been building furniture now for quite a while, and I have two go-to finishes: wipe-on polyurethane, and then a shellac, which I mixed myself from shellac flakes. But don't use shellac because it's not waterproof, and so for a stock, that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But while you're standing there in the aisle at Home Depot or Lowe's, you're going to look for a little pint can of some kind of wipe-on poly. It's wipe-on polyurethane, and the reason why you want the wipe-on stuff, it's thinner, and if you try to spray any kind of poly on it, you're going to get orange peel. I don't care who you are, what religion you are, how much you had to drink. You are going to get orange peel, and you're going to have to sand it all down. It's a real pain. And you really can't put it on with a brush, even a foam brush. You'll still get streaks and drips, and they'll hear cursing from the garage. So you want to wipe on poly, and it doesn't really matter. If you want a high gloss finish, then you should get a gloss poly. I like to use satin just because it looks nice, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do here. So a pint of that, and then while you're there, in exactly the same spot in the aisle, you're going to buy a can of Johnson's floor wax. They're the yellow can. They've been around since you and I weren't even born, which is really a long time ago. And it's like $6, and this is enough to last you the rest of your natural life for what we're going to do. And if you don't have any, I want you to get some 4/0 steel wool. So that steel wool comes in different grades, that from really rough to really, really, really fine. And the really fine stuff, it's 4/0. So it has 4 zeros on the package. Okay, so poly, wipe on poly, and then you want some Johnson's floor wax and 4/0 steel wool. Now, the fun starts. And it's actually really easy. It really is. So get yourself set up, spread some newspaper out, put a rubber glove on your offhand that you're going to be holding the stock with. And then what you want to do is you want to make a little pad out of an old T-shirt or something, wet it with the polyurethane, and then wipe it over your stock. And you're just looking to put a thin coat on. And it doesn't matter what it looks like. It really doesn't. You don't want big goopy runs, and boogers all over the place. But
you've seen my work.
You want to, yeah, exactly. Your reputation precedes you.
Yeah.
And so rub that all over the stock, and then go away for a day because it's going to soak in. And something that's really important with this polyurethane is that it's a synthetic, so it really has to dry until it hardens. It can be dry in an hour or two where you touch it and you think, oh, it's dry. But then if you try to sand it or something, it'll gum up and it'll load up your sanding paper. So you need at least 24 hours on this first coat. So Now, when you're done with that, you want to come back, and then you're going to sand the whole thing with that 400 grit sandpaper. And you're going to notice something interesting is happening. It's starting to look really good. It's smooth, and what you're doing is you're sealing the wood. So then after you do your sanding on it, then you want to wipe it off with a nice clean rag, and then do it again. Another coat of this true oil. I'm sorry, not true oil, the poly. The same thing. Leave it alone now for a day or two. And the longer you leave it alone, the better. Truly. Like 2 or 3 days is what I do. Because then it's hard. And then that way, when you sand it, you're actually sanding the finish as opposed to kind of mushing it around because it's still a little bit soft. And at this point, you probably have a good enough finish on your rifle stock. And so once it hardens, sand it with that 400 steel wool or 400 grit paper, and you're ready for the final treatment. Let's say you're done now, okay? What you can do, though, is you could do that same wipe-on poly 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. The more you do it, the deeper the finish, the better it's going to look. But let's say you've stopped it now. Now, I would let it dry another day or two because you want a really, really hard finish. Then open up your can of floor wax, get your 4/0 steel wool, dip the steel wool in the floor wax, and then rub it all over the stock. And you're going to go with the grain, and you're rubbing kind of lightly, but you'll see what's happening is that it's kind of polishing this surface finish, making it really even and smooth. And when you're done, let the wax dry, which takes 10 or 15 minutes, wipe it off with a clean, cloth of some kind, and you are going to have a really nice looking stock.
Really?
It's going to be smooth, it's going to be protected, and you're going to be amazed. And the cool thing about that, too, is that if you get a big ding on it or something, you can just sort of repair it and do the similar process. Now, so that's standard hardwood stock, sanding it, raise the grain, sand it again, wipe on poly, several coats, sanding in between with the 400 grits, and your final thing is that 4/0 steel wool with the paste wax. And then when you're all done, what I like to do is just go ahead and put another coat of paste wax on it, let that dry, and then buff that off. And then you're just going to be amazed. And something interesting a lot of people don't know about that paste wax is if this is a hunting rifle or something, before you go in the field, I always just use car wax, but if you have the paste wax, and wax your whole gun. Just wax the metal, wax the outside of the scope, wax the barrel, wax everything. Because what does wax do? It repels water.
Right.
And it is amazing the difference. It protects your guns from all kinds of crud out there, blood that splashes on it when you're cleaning the game or if it rains. But it's weird because it just beads right up on your gun. And you think, hey, that's like a car wax commercial because it works. And so that's the basic process.
Well, you made the point in there that with spray poly, no matter who you are, you get orange peel. And I thought it was just me.
No. Oh, no. When I started doing furniture, I bought this fancy, high velocity, low pressure sprayer. I bought the best, polyurethane spray finishes that money can buy. I mean, I tried everything, and all of them had various, kinds of orange peel. Some are better than others. And even the pros tell me, though, that that's just part of the deal.
Wow.
You lay it on with that, and then you sand in between coats. So basically, if you do that with your gun, if you use a spray finish, you can, but you're going to spend more time sanding between coats because you're going to want to knock those, high bumpy parts out.
Huh.
And people may not know that term orange peel. It's because it looks like an orange peel, so it's got the little ridges and bumpies. It's like 1960s era car paint. I remember brand new cars had plenty of orange peel all over them.
Yeah, that's funny.
So there's that, and I don't know. If we have time, I could sort of explain the next best process. Meaning, if you want something a little fancier, it's essentially the same, but we use a couple of different products.
Well, let's go for it.
All right, good. Now, this time what we're going to do is find some Birchwood Casey True Oil, TRUOIL. And that's actually, those $10,000 custom rifle stocks. Chances are pretty good that he's using Birchwood Casey True Oil. And you can just get it right on Amazon.com, or, a lot of times well-equipped gun stores will have sort of a home gunsmithing section, where they'll have stock finishing kits and stuff like that. Watch for the True Oil. Everything else is essentially the same, okay? So you'll take the old finish off, you'll sand it down, and then when you're ready to put the finish on, rather than using the poly, you're going to use True Oil. And what I like about True Oil is it's kind of a blend of varnish and oils, and it's got a dryer in it. So unlike regular, like linseed oil that takes a year and a day to dry, the True Oil will actually be dry within just a couple hours. So put your first coat on. You can use your fingers. It's actually kind of good because it'll rub it into the wood, or you can use a tight little bit of rag. So put a nice coat on and then let that dry overnight. And then the next day it's the same thing. Sand it, back to 400 grit, wipe it all off, another coat of True Oil. With about 5 coats of True Oil, it's going to be really deep. It builds up fast and well. So it really fills the wood. And depending on how much you sand it down in between coats, you literally can get a glass-like finish.
Wow.
So if you want the like really shiny finish, when you're finished with your last coat of True Oil, you can just evaluate it and look at it and say, do I like this look? And if you've done a good job putting it in, it's going to look pretty darn good. At this point, though, what I like to do is go over it with that 4/0 steel wool with the polish, or with the wax, because you just get this absolutely lovely satin flat. The finish is buttery smooth, and it's soft. It feels soft. And then if you've done a good job with the rest of the gun, you've cleaned it all up, put a little cold bluing here or there. When you bolt the thing back together again and hand it to people, they're going to do just what we said. They're going to look at you and say, you did this?
Wow.
So I know.
For people that don't know, talk about what an actual hand-rubbed oil finish was. And there are still some custom builders out there that say they do that. But what was that? Because I don't think folks necessarily understand what those finishes were. It's
similar. In other words, they'll prep the wood, and then you'll get something like a linseed oil was a real famous brand, which is essentially boiled linseed oil. And the problem with the old oil finishes is that they took forever to build up. In other words, they took 20, 30 coats. And so what they would do is that they would apply it with their fingers and then literally rub it into the stock really well, really hard, rub it into the stock like for an hour, over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Wipe it all off and let it dry. And then do it again and do it again. And about the third time, everybody had their secret blend, and all these, high-end guys in the 30s and 40s and 50s and stuff. Nobody wanted to talk about how they did it because everybody had their own secrets, wing of bat and,
Eye of newt,
that kind of stuff. Eye of newt, exactly. But generally, you do the hand rubbing, and then they used to get something, I think a common word for it is rotten stone polish, but what it is that there's various grits, polishing grit. It's like a powder. And so they would make a slurry with the oil, and then they would use that and go over the whole stock. And so what you're doing is you're hand rubbing it and polishing it, and it takes forever. And it's another reason why those guns cost $10,000. And now I will say this, when you're finally done, it is the most amazing finish because it has a luster and a depth and just a subtle beauty that you just can't get any other way. Yeah. It's like rust bluing. There's a reason why Doug Turnbull does rust bluing. It's because nothing else looks like that, And so that's what, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It's a simple thing, and it takes simple tools, linseed oil and patience, and I'm sure you can find some kind of, you don't really need to use that polishing grit, although it's pretty common. If you can't find it, look in woodworking stores have similar things like that, but you can sort of do the same thing with your 400 grit paper. Use wet or dry, with a little bit of the oil on it, and then use that to go over the stock, and you'll get the same thing. But just practice a little bit, because you can't really hurt anything as long as you're not gouging the wood or doing something silly like that. Now, if you really want to, you've got your beater 22, you just want to get it back up and running. It looks embarrassing. You don't want anyone to see it, or something. Then, go ahead and just, sand the stock. You might have to start with like 180 grit and go to 220, maybe 320. Raise the grain one time, like we were talking about with the water, and then sand it back down again. And then go ahead and buy a rattle can of, semi-gloss, because gloss is really hard to make look good, but a semi-gloss spray polyurethane. And then, and just put a piece of coat hanger through a stock hole or something, just hang it up, and then just light coat all over the gun. And then let it dry and hit it another light coat, hit it another light coat. Then you could do that 400 grit, 320, 400 grit sand to kind of get all your orange peel out. and then your final coat, just take your time, and I mean, it's going to dry. Give it about a week before you use it, and it's going to look pretty darn good. And it'll be easy, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. And probably 99% of the kind of stock finishing most people want to do, with their seasonal, Walmart Remington 870, hunting shotgun, would be just fine doing that. So,
well, when we were talking about oil finishes, I got to share again. I'm a good example of a bad example. For the longest time, I thought an oil finish was just gun oil, and I couldn't figure out why the stocks I was refinishing, and still in my early double-digit years, I couldn't figure out why they just didn't look very good. It's because I was trying to rub in that the 3-in-1 or whatever, and it just wasn't working out for me.
That's why I watch you all the time, because I never know what you're going to get involved in.
Yeah.
That's very funny. Well, because there has to be a way for it to dry. Yeah. And even linseed or, linseed oil kind of really won't dry on its own. That's why you've got to rub it into the stock and do that, that final finishing kind of a thing. And it's also why I like to put a little wax on them. But remember, that's the old days. And a hand painted, a lot of people don't know this. In the early days of auto painting, they used to actually paint the cars with a brush, and it was a lacquer. And then, but what do you get when you paint something with a brush? You get brush strokes, right? It doesn't matter how fancy the brush is. So then they would sand all of the brush marks out and then paint it again, and then sand all the brush marks out and paint it again. And then the final finish was the polish, of course, with various grits of they used the same sort of powdered polishing compounds. And so that was what a hand rubbed lacquer finish was. And it was beautiful. But just because that was beautiful and that's how they did it in the old days doesn't mean that still makes sense to do today. And so that's why a lot of those old oil finishes they're beautiful, but gosh, you have to be some kind of a magician sometimes to really know how to do it. Yeah. And Birchwood Casey True Oil, that's my go-to. That's what I use just about all the time. And, one more thing here too, is there's something else that's really handy and you need to learn about them if people don't know about this, is learn about metal scrapers. And what a metal scraper is think of a piece of flat, we're talking like paper, thin, maybe a little thicker than that, piece of pretty good quality steel in a square. They come in all different shapes. If you Google, wood scrapers, that kind of a thing, you'll see what I'm talking about. And you can get a kit, 4 or 5 of them, probably cost you $10 or $12. But the edges have, what you do is that you roll the edge over with a hardened steel rod, like a piece of drill rod. And what that does is that it puts a little lip on it. So now, rather than using sandpaper, use this metal, it's like a card scraper, only it's metal, and you scrape your stock with that. And what that does is that will get off the old finish, and it levels it. And unlike sandpaper, it doesn't raise the whiskers. It doesn't raise the grain. And if you really take your time after you use a metal scraper, you're ready for the final. You're ready for finishing. It's a miracle. You can also do the same thing with a piece of glass. So, like if you just got a piece of glass, drop it on the floor, and that now you've got an instant whole bunch of different shapes of metal scrapers and or wood scrapers. Just be smarter than the broken piece of glass is all. But that sharp edge of the glass, if that helps to illustrate it, that just you can imagine what it does is you scrape it across the wood, and it works a bit like a wood plane kind of, Huh. So.
Well, I've got a whole bucket of it out in the garage right now since I broke a mirror yesterday on top of everything else.
Well, so you're halfway there then.
Yeah, exactly. I've got no, honey, I can't throw that out. It's gunsmithing tools.
That's right. I didn't even know that. And you know what? The very first stock I finished, and which I think you said something about shoe polish, that's actually what I did. And some old guy told me, kid, just, use shoe polish. And so I believed him. And so I had a walnut stock. I sanded it all down. I didn't know what I was doing. I know I should have done a better job, but at some point I just got brown shoe polish, and I was good at polishing shoes. And so I kind of understood how that worked. And I just put shoe polish all over the gun and kind of rubbed it all in and let it dry and polished it all off. And darn if it didn't look pretty decent. I mean, there's really no reason why you can't do that. Shoe polish has solvents in it that evaporate off, and so it leaves the wax. So really, you're just waxing it is all you're doing, just like we're doing with the Johnson wax. So that was kind of fun. Best thing, though, is do just what you did, was get yourself maybe not a 2x4 out of pine, because pine is a challenge to do it with. But, get yourself a piece of oak or, birch or some kind of a hardwood that you've got, walnut. The big home stores have all this stuff. Just buy a little piece and then and just practice a little bit. And I think you'll be quite amazed to just what you can do with very few tools.
Yeah.
And if you mess it up, that you just sand it off and do it again.
Exactly. Well, in the time we've got left, is there anything special or different you need to do with wooden handgun stocks or grips?
Oh, that's a good point. No, as a matter of fact, there isn't. All of this can be applied to handgun grips. I think the biggest sin that people do with any of this stuff is they oversand. Yeah. And so let's say you have a rifle stock that's got a butt pad on it, or a recoil pad or something like that. Well, what they do is that they'll take the butt plate off or the recoil pad off. They'll sand. They'll go into this sanding frenzy. And now when you put your recoil plate back on or your butt plate back on, it sticks up around the edges of the stock, see, because they sanded it down. And so you got to keep things like that in mind as you're working on your stock. And so that may be, lighten up as you get to the edges, because you don't want to lower any of the edges that meet up with the metal. That's another good reason to use a scraper. Because you really can control, what you're doing. But that's doubly important with handgun stocks, of course, because they meet the grip frame, and it's obvious if you look. It's like, oh, no, you really messed these grips up. So take your time. But all this basic True Oil or the wipe-on polys, even the spray poly, they work actually really good for handgun grips.
Well, I had to laugh when you were talking about oversanding, because I think there's a 22 out there somewhere that, like the tang in the wrist, it's sticking up above the wood because a teenager got a little carried away with his, 100 sandpaper or whatever.
Well, if you're really serious about this, and that doesn't, if somebody's refinishing their 22, there's no reason for them not to be serious about it.
Yeah.
You would leave the metal butt plate on. And maybe even around the trigger guard, to leave the trigger guard on while you do the stock finishing. If it's a lever gun, you've got that tang that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Well, you would actually leave that on while you did the sanding, because then all of the surfaces will match seamlessly. And that's that $10,000 rifle that we're talking about. That's how they do that.
Yeah.
And so they finish both at the same time. And so now once everything's perfectly matched, then now they refinish the metal, and then they apply the finish to the to the wood, and that's how they get those. I can't see the seam.
Yeah. Yeah.
So pretty cool.
So take your time, do it right, which was always my big failure. But, you know, when you're getting ready to refinish a long gun, a rifle or whatever, how much time do you kind of block out, or do you think that's going to take you?
Well, you might be done with the sanding in a half an hour or an hour. And so really, in a lot of times, in an hour and a half, you can have it sanded to the point that you're ready to apply the finish and then put your first coat on. Well, now you're done.
Yeah.
Now go do something else fun for a couple of days, come back, do a light sanding, apply another coat, half hour, an hour at the most. And so, I mean, I'll bet you total time on one of these just sort of workman-like, jobs that we're doing on just a hunting rifle or something like that. I bet you would have, maybe 3 or 4 hours invested in the total process.
Yeah.
Spread out over a lot of time. So, that's another reason why I like the True Oil, though, because you could actually do it in a day. In other words, True Oil dries fast enough that you can apply it and then go do something for 45 minutes or an hour, come back, rub it out, apply it again. And by, 4 or 5 coats like that, say by the end of the day, as you in between other little chores you're doing, well, you'll be finished.
Yeah.
It is very cool. Some of the fast dry spray on polyurethane, you can almost do that. They say sand for the next coat. Usually it's in under 1 hour, but then they reach a point to where after an hour, now you have to wait 24 hours before you can apply another coat. So just read the instructions. But mostly, remember, it's just wipe on poly, and then 4/0 steel wool, some Johnson's floor wax, or other good quality floor wax like that. And then you're pretty much ready to, and sandpaper, and you're pretty much ready to do what you want to do, and then do it.
Excellent advice. I wish I'd known you some 40 years ago, and there would probably be some guns floating around that aren't as ugly as they are today. My BB gun, I wish I could find it. If somebody has got an old Red Ryder out there that has a very crudely fashioned stock made of pine and dyed with a blonde maple stain, and with a few crude attempts at checkering, I might pay top dollar for that, but or I might disavow it. I don't know, but
yeah, you better watch out, because Turnbull Restoration may want to give you a job.
I don't think
after
so.
Hearing that, I don't know. What I was going to say though before we leave is, if you want to really fancy your gun up, get an old bleach bottle, cut a piece of the plastic out, and put it underneath the butt plate when you screw it back on, and trim it to size.
Yeah.
And then that gives you this real thin white line spacer, and people will confuse your gun for a Weatherby.
Wow. An extra bonus tip from Roy Huntington, stock refinisher extraordinaire. Well, Roy, I appreciate you taking the time, and I've actually, as always, learned some stuff from you. So we'll head out your way one of these days, and you can grade my efforts. So anyway, we appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully making some more beautiful guns.
Cool. Always a fun trip, Brent. Thank you.
I hope you learned as much as I did about stock refinishing in our chat with Roy Huntington. And with that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first in the business, and we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast catcher, YouTube, and of course, at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com and AmericanCop.com. We'd also appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. And finally, don't forget to check out the presenting sponsor of the Guns Magazine podcast, 1791 Gunleather. Visit them at 1791gunleather.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast for the entire staff at FMG Publications. I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.